I would like now to take a little bit of time to talk about this amazing young professional that we have here today. As mentioned before, the title of our session is the COVID-19 challenge and the teaching implications till now. I must say that I have met Dr. Celia Antoniou, and we met when she was not doctor, when she was a very, very young, she's still young, but very accomplished.
I'm still just
Celia. and yeah, she's just Celia the rest of the time, but tonight we are being very, very professional. So she's from Greece, and we've met. She's actually served on the board of Tisor Macedonia Thrace, Northern Greece in the past, and we are very proud that one of our own has moved forward, and she has had such a brilliant career despite her young age. So Celia has worked as a lecturer in applied linguistics and TESOL at the University of Portsmouth, UK, and is a senior fellow at IOE, UCLA in London. She's also program leader for the BA in the English Studies, English ESL?
ESL, English as a second
language of the University of the West of Scotland. Her main research interests are many. They lie in the areas of concept-based instruction, assessment, e-learning, sociocultural theory, English for specific and academic purposes. In the past, she has served as an EFL teacher in a variety of contexts here in Greece, in Ireland, and in the UK. She convenes training sessions at various levels, and she also teaches distance learning units for universities, for university students, and these she's also involved in the technology enhanced learning SIG of the LEAP and the research SIG of IATEFL as a committee member. I know that you will ask me these questions, so I will jump the gun and answer. Yes, there will be certificates of attendance for those of you who have registered through the official email through the website, so you will receive them afterwards, and the recording will be available for members only via the IATEFL website, possibly Monday or Tuesday. Whether or not Celia will share her slides is something that she will decide, but she has been very generous so far. So enjoy the session. I will be here, but I will switch off my camera. And thank you so much, Dr. Antoniou, for your time. We are looking forward to this amazing webinar.
Excellent, thank you. So let me start by sharing my screen. It's so great to see all of you here today. Good afternoon from me. Thank you, Maria, again for this very, very warm introduction. I'm very happy to have joined this series of very interesting monthly webinars that IATEFL has organized. I'm sure you will agree that the COVID-19 pandemic has raised significant challenges for the language education community worldwide. And a particular challenge has been the urgent and always unexpected, request for previously face-to-face classes and courses to be taught online. So for the next hour, we'll go together through some of the challenges of the pandemic and how these have been experienced by some educators till now, as part of a pilot study that I have conducted with colleagues from the field. And we will also look at some implications for current teaching. Now, Maria has already introduced me. I will quickly tell you that I'm a member of the IATEFL Research Special Interest Group. I'm one of the committee members, and I serve as a webinar officer. Maria has also told you that I teach as a lecturer, and I have been working as a teacher trainer as well with digital learning expertise. So as a researcher and as a language teacher, I have a special interest in designing and developing online English language courses. So in this interactive webinar for today, we will focus at first on the experiences of language educators in their effort to deliver online classes and how they reflected on this experience, their required training along with lessons that they learned, and also some future steps that they decided to take. The second part of the webinar, as you can see, will present some examples for engaging students while teaching online that the participants of this specific pilot study mentioned, and also a number of strategies that have proven to be effective for them in these circumstances. And the third part of the presentation, we'll discuss some of the emotions experienced by teachers while working online and their own advice for regulating them as they reported it. Then we will finish off with some recommendations for teachers and teacher education and some ideas about how to develop, keep teaching and overcome the difficulties that come. Some of you, as you have mentioned in the comments, have already started teaching. So I'm sure you're already experiencing some of these difficulties. But now I would like you to take some time and just like I asked the pilot studies participants to do, I would like you to go back to spring 2020 and reflect on the experience that you had back then for a moment, and use the chat box to type one word that you feel best describes your teaching experience back then. I would like you to use just one word: challenging but exciting, stressful, challenging, stiff-necked, formative, chaotic, uncertain, lost, insecure, innovative. Okay, so we saw a little bit of positive thinking there. Daunting, updated, enjoyable. It's very, very good to see that some of you actually felt that it was a good experience. Illuminating, draining, possible, frustrating, challenging, enriching, different. It was certainly different. I mean, there's no denying, as we said from the beginning, that life with COVID-19, has suddenly and unavoidably become more difficult and complicated for everyone, including language teachers. Positive, adventurous, excellent. These are pretty much some of the words that the study participants mentioned as well. Stressful, professional development. Okay, I think that this goes back to the training needs that you all had. Intimidating. Excellent. Now, how language teachers, thank you so much for all these comments. Now, how language teachers coped in the midst of the crisis, as much of the world was locked down and the education systems were disrupted, is a topic that we are going to see a lot. As many projects have been carried out up until now, you're going to see lots of papers. Some of them have already been published. And not all of the experiences reported there are the same. And I have chosen to use this. You will see that not all experiences were negative. So as this quote mentions, good things can still happen in the midst of chaos. So considering, the unique stressors of the pandemic and, the pedagogical responses around the world, the pilot study that I carried out addressed, first of all, some questions of how teachers experienced their transition from on-site to online teaching, including the reflections on, first of all, teacher education needs, which some of you already mentioned as training, the reflections on how their students responded to their initiatives and the interventions that they applied, the resources, and also their own feelings and strategies. There was a total of 42 language teachers who participated in the pilot study with an online survey tool that I employed. The findings, of course, cannot be considered representative at this stage, but they are, I believe, indicative and can be helpful to all language teachers in terms of preparing for the new term, if you're not teaching already, as some of you said, and in terms of helping you, to understand what some good practice suggestions could be. The focus today will be on presenting the question items and responses in an informal, discursive way. I would like to interact with you and hear your ideas as well. So there's not going to be complicated data and statistics involved, I promise that. But before we begin, one of the key aspects reported by the participants in this pilot study was their uncertainty in terms of the type of teaching that they were involved in when asked to describe what they do when teaching online. So I felt that it is important to clarify what we mean when we refer to these types of teaching and learning, as at times these terms were used interchangeably by colleagues. So, of course, as you can see on this slide, online teaching was one of the most obvious terms to use. In general, online teaching results from careful instructional design and planning, using a systematic model for designing and developing a course. Now, the design process and the careful considerations of different design decisions have an impact on the quality of the instruction. So online teaching is something that is usually carefully designed in order to be offered online. As you can understand, most of the participants thought that they were doing online teaching. Very few, only two actually mentioned the term emergency remote teaching. And I have included a quote that has been used a lot in the past few months. I'm quoting Hodges 2020. So these two participants actually realized that emergency remote teaching is a temporary shift of instructional delivery to an alternate delivery mode due to the crisis circumstances. And the idea is that at some point we will resume and we'll go back to normal and all these structures will be abated. Others were talking about blended learning. Blended learning, as you can understand from the term blend, it means that you are blending actually face-to-face and digital experiences. But blended learning is usually delivered as part of a physical classroom experience. So it might be that in some cases they were doing this, but from what they were describing in their context of teaching, they weren't actually doing blended learning. And then we have something that we have seen a lot, a term that we have encountered a lot again in the past few months, hybrid learning. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, you see it pretty much everywhere. So hybrid learning and teaching is the approach that builds on the successes of everything that we've mentioned so far, of the successes of blended, of remote, of distance, of online learning. And the idea is that we're creating experiences for our learners that are personalized, engaging, and relevant. So it's like an umbrella term to deal with the need for more flexible learning. So now that we more or less have clarified this, I'd like you now to see something different. As you can understand, one of the questions was to ask participants to reflect on the key challenges during the pandemic. The very first one that they referred to was the fact that they had to have prior training in online teaching techniques. I'm mentioning some of the results in the order in which the participants reported to them. This is because teaching staff of all backgrounds and ages have had to prepare and deliver the classes from home with all the practical and technical challenges that this entailed during the pandemic period, and often without the proper technical support. But on top of that, another challenge for them was the lack of pedagogical content knowledge required for teaching online. And now some of them thought that these only relates to specific teaching techniques or how to use specific types of software, but I thought that this is mostly about understanding how we interact online. What are the patterns of interaction that we have online? Then the next challenge that they mentioned during the pandemic was accessing necessary digital devices, both for the learners, both for their students, but also for the teachers. And we're going to see that a little bit later as well during the presentation, because this is something that came up a lot during the study. The third challenge was to revise any existing resources or materials for online teaching, to revisit what they already had and see how this could be appropriate for online delivery, perhaps by reducing content, the length of any resources that they already had, so that students would be able to follow online in a healthy way. And then the final challenge was managing their emotions, their own emotions, and those of their students. This is how they reported. They say our own emotions and those of our students. How do we manage frustration, for example, when students work online? These were the key challenges that they reported during the pandemic. Now, when the participants were asked what they thought would be the key challenges for the new teaching period, they first mentioned that deciding on the model of online delivery was the challenge, as they had to factor in experiences from their employers or expectations from their institutions, the students, the parents in some cases. And I will return to this point later and present to you some of the models of online delivery that the participants mentioned, that they were going to use this term, that they're using this term. The next challenge, as you can see, was the combination of resources in terms of two aspects. The first aspect was the balance between different types of activities. For example, speaking activities and reading activities, if they would do actually a lot of reading activity, because a lot of participants mentioned that they felt that some of the students would consider that reading and writing is a skill that they can do in their own time, and they don't actually spend a lot of time doing this online, or at least spend as much time as they would spend normally when they would do this in the classroom. So, transferring this online felt different. And then the second aspect were the different elements to deliver the lesson that they had to consider. For example, the fact that they had to identify different modes of online collaboration, different patterns. Would the students work in pairs? Would they work in groups, in teams, for example? They had to identify a learning management system that they wanted to use. They had to select compatible video conferencing platforms so that they would be able to see their students. So that was, a key challenge. The third one was the screen time management. That refers to the ability to manage, their screen time, multitasking, and their own engagement in online browsing and sometimes social media with self-control. I'm not sure how many of you might have noticed this, but this still remains a challenge when working online for both teachers and students. I'm sure you might have realized that students find it, hard when you teach as well to realize, how many open windows they have in front of them in some cases, what else they could be doing when they receive, for example, a message on, TikTok, Facebook. And then again, the final challenge for now was again managing their own emotions, developing, in other words, what we call digital empathy, and expressing their feelings and offering support to others, to the students and also to colleagues while working online. These were the challenges. So I'd like now to pause for a minute and reflect on this first set of findings. And use the chat box to just share your thoughts on the question that we have here. With all your experiences till now, with everything that you've been through till now, how have you prepared for teaching this coming term? What is it that that you have done, to overcome some of these challenges? Have you perhaps, okay, so it says be open for whatever comes, lots of training. Thanks to my school, took a class on online teaching strategies. Very good. I have prepared simplified materials, met online with other teachers, bought a better computer, better equipment. Yes, and that's a very, very big discussion, which is going to come up a lot. Join help groups, online tools, oh my God, prepare online materials, be flexible, and oh my God, assessment. Yes, exactly how you would assess the students. I had to buy a new computer, hosted webinars to get more experience. I see what you mean. Limit use of online tools to Padlet and specific applications that you felt were appropriate for your teaching context. Online quizzes. My establishment is offering training and teleworking equipment. Okay, so you took lots of different decisions, right? In order to see both widescreen and curved monitor, yes. Learn how to use breakout rooms, exactly. So thank you so much, my God, you have been doing so many things. So this actually takes us up to discussing the training needs of language colleagues. And you'll not be surprised to see that from the participants of this study, 26 teachers had no experience of teaching online in the COVID-19 area. And why would they need to have? I mean, everything was normal. We had face-to-face teaching. 11 of the participants had experience of running distance learning programs. And this is because, just a reminder here, that the language teachers of this study were coming from various teaching contexts. So we had, for example, people who were teaching languages at universities, at private language schools, at public language schools, and also, in the UK, in Europe, and internationally. So some had some experience of running distance learning courses. 5 had some experience of offering a form of blended learning. Although from what I mentioned earlier, and after they described, you know, in open questions, what exactly it was that they were doing, it wasn't exactly blended learning. But they had at least, you know, some experience, but the vast majority was not prepared for this situation. So this then led to the next question about lessons learned and in which areas they felt that they should focus or train more in the future. So the very first one included the need to learn how to build a community while teaching online, or how many actually term it as team building. So this came from the realization that teaching and learning have always been you know, rooted to establishing relationships when teaching online or on-site. And it shouldn't be a new realization, it's just that when all the teaching was transferred in an online environment, this became even more intense, even more you know, obvious that in some, you know, in the class, you definitely need to do something to build a community and continue teaching. The second lesson referred to the digital divide. A lot of the participants mentioned that some students have been left behind while they, you know, they were teaching them because of lack of access to appropriate, for example, devices or bandwidth, and lack of you know, school or university readiness, while others had been able to accelerate their digital learning because they had access to high-performing devices, or you know, through sophisticated software, and because they had highly trained teachers. So this digital divide, I think, became even more intense by the crisis, and it is something that could leave gaps in many children's learning. And the reason I mention this here is because the lesson was about finding alternative ways to overcome the obstacles, and this was linked later on in the study with the mode of delivery of the classes for the new term. So because of this, some institutions decided that you would actually be able to you know, offer different types of delivery. Have, for example, some people attend face-to-face perhaps, and then alternate and have other classes online, exactly because of this problem. The third lesson was the need to develop the students' digital skills while simultaneously working online and teaching language, by offering them some short training sessions on the use of specific software, for example, how to use, for instance, Teams, how to use other types of platforms. And the fourth lesson, sorry, was the teacher's realization that ongoing training and development in digital competencies is essential via different routes, for example, either through tutorials, webinars, live training sessions, not, of course, as IT experts, because language teachers are not expected to be IT experts, but mostly having a general understanding of online teaching interactions and patterns. That the sessions need to be shorter, for example, in order to reduce the cognitive workload that we have, and so on. So their next steps of action from the participants of this study were found to be as presented here. First of all, finding a balance among online activities, developing, in other words, a tailored approach to deliver language classes depending on circumstances, and primarily by focusing on the right balance, as we said, of different types of tasks that they could do. And then being ready, and that's the most important one, to pivot to online teaching at any stage in another, if, for example, we have another outbreak. And this, of course, involves, for most of the teachers, having materials in place, and some of you have said this is what you have actually done. Having already thought about the platforms that you're using, which interactive or collaboration materials you would like to have, which video conferencing tool you would use, having tried all of them out to be sure that you can actually have them working. This then led to another question about how the language teachers thought that they would be teaching this term, having thought of all the previous challenges that they had experienced, the training that they had, and their answers included the following. Again, this does not mean that there are no other models to consider. I'm simply reporting the ones that were mentioned by the participants. So some of the teachers said that they were going to do half and half on site. And what does this practically mean? It means that Monday, for example, they had half of their class on site doing the lesson face-to-face, wearing masks and taking all the necessary measures. And then the other half of the class would come on Tuesday, for instance. And you can understand what implications this had. They have to extend, for example, the teaching period or reduce the curriculum and what they had to cover. The second option was the sandwich option. And this was from people who were actually teaching in higher education. So they were saying that first they were going to do one on-site session at the very beginning of the term, with the whole class, of course, wearing masks and taking all the necessary precautions. And then all the other sessions were going to be offered remotely. And then hopefully at the end, they will be able to resume again and have one final session to actually, have like a conclusion to the teaching period. The third option was alternating on-site and remotely. And from what they described, what they wanted to do was in 1 week, the very first week, for example, they would have the whole class come into campus with masks and they would be taught on site. The next week, the whole class would be taught remotely. And then the next week again on site, and then the week after remotely. Another model was the rota. The rota was the option where they would have, for example, half of the students coming on site, and then the other half would be taught remotely. They would try to catch up online and do asynchronous activities. And then the week after, those who were back home, they would come to class, and those who were in class, they would go online. And then the fifth model that they reported was normal classroom teaching. Going back to school, going back to their classes as normal, wearing masks, all precautions. No online teaching, but ready to resume online in case of another outbreak. So lots of different options, as you can see there, depending on their contexts and the needs of their students. I just wanted to see from you, to hear, what it is that you're doing, because some of you said that you have already started teaching. Is there a specific model that your institution or school employer has chosen to follow for this fall? From these five. And even if there's something that I haven't covered here, you might want to describe it. As I said, it doesn't mean that there are no other modules. There are many other modules. These are just the ones that the participants of this study have reported. So they say online only in university, remote, mixed, blended, normal classroom, reduced. As you can see, there are people who will be teaching, normally back in the classroom, wearing their face masks, blended, some on site, some remote, alternating and online only, remotely. Here in Argentina, I have online classes, 5 normal classroom, sandwich, some of you are doing sandwich, so on site, then fully online, and then back again together. Synchronous Zoom sessions, no chance to on-site classes in Argentina. Yes, again, alternating on-site and remote, actually cancelled on-site, following, yes, the different situations in different places. So that kind of gives you an idea of what is happening as well at the moment and how quickly things could change. New York students stay in their classrooms and teachers rotate rooms. We are still actually not entirely sure of how things will go. Some people actually still don't know. So it does tell you as well the level of preparedness in some cases. Wow, thank you so much, everyone, for contributing what you're currently doing. Now, I'll move on in the question of how language teachers prepared for choosing a model of delivery online. And I said, the question was pretty much, so, okay, if you're about to teach, then how exactly are you going to make a decision on this? And a lot of them referred back to the challenges that they faced, and more specifically to the one about combining resources. If you remember when they were discussing the challenges that they faced during the pandemic, And they wanted to talk about, a lot of them want to talk about the order in which they came up with the ideal delivery plan and the order of the elements that they used after having tried out various different versions and combinations. And I'm sure you all identify with this. You've all been inundated with different types of tools, different types of applications. This is pretty much what it looked like. It looked like a circle of different elements, like choosing, for example, a learning management system. In some cases, this was a recommendation from the school. Then deciding on assistance and support in place. So I felt that this was like their safety net to actually know what support they have. And then moving on to say which type of video conferencing platform we're going to use and what extras we can integrate based on the support that can be provided to us. So the assistance and support in place was actually a factor that played a very, very important role in enabling them to make decisions about additional tools that they wanted to use. Now, in the factors that affected their decision for the final model of delivery, the participants mentioned the above 5 as playing a role based on their experiences during the pandemic. So institutional expectations and requirements, the course and task requirements. So for example, if they had a specific course in mind that they wanted to deliver, and the students were, for example, expected to be able to achieve specific objectives by the end of the, of the course, that was something that played a role. Their comfort zones, and that was very, very interesting to hear. It was things that they had tried during the first outbreak. They felt that they were working well for them. They felt that the students also reacted positively to all this. So they decided to carry on with this in some cases. Time restrictions, especially if they had, that goes for higher education mostly, especially if they had students in other parts of the world. And then their context, and the context refers to the budget that the institutions would have, the equipment that they had, any other financial concerns in terms of buying licenses in order to use specific tools and platforms. But in general, these were the 5 key factors that came up. Now, this is the second part of the study. When I prompted the teachers to report on their experience of how they engaged with students, their first advice was attracting and managing attention. For example, they said that they were trying to make activities worthwhile, relevant, related to desired outcomes, or personally meaningful based on the students' interests or topics that they might have previously discussed in the classroom. The second way of engaging the students was to have prior knowledge. This came actually, to engage prior knowledge, this came actually really highly. They were assigning, for example, pre-reading tasks. They had classroom discussions, peer discussions, short video intros. They were trying to embed videos into activities and tasks to make them more interactive and lively. And then the third one was their attempt to reduce the cognitive workload. For example, by avoiding teaching with PowerPoint slides that contained lots of content that required students, for instance, to listen, to read, and to take notes simultaneously. So they tried to avoid this, or by having, for example, online content on Moodle, for instance, that was carefully organized in a nice way. So this actually goes back to a diagram that I had a while ago, which says what strategies they could use about engaging students. So one of them was to create an online classroom routine, which would then involve sharing information at the beginning of the lesson, during the warm-up, or doing a little bit of tech check, discussing the participation guidelines so that they would have a sense of community when interacting together, checking their audios and videos, using the chatbots, just like you're doing pretty much now in order to interact. And some of their suggestions that had to do with e-moderation of online discussions in general, or forums, or whether the students were working collaboratively on a Google document to do something. And they said that their role there had different aspects. Some of them mentioned that they were trying to be active moderators, and they would try to avoid commenting immediately after a student's response, because it wouldn't want to interrupt, as you can understand, the thinking process or influence the students' answers. But they wanted to help them express their opinions and give a justification for this. So they would give them, for example, questions such as, can you give us some examples in order to support your views? Or they would try to ask, open-ended questions that would help the students provide answers that would be more diverse. For example, they would tell, could you please explain what you mean by this, to help them, elaborate a little bit more, or what is, for example, the connection that you see between A and Z, for instance. And then they would try to, the third thing that I mentioned about the moderation was that they would try to help students comment on each other's work with meaningful comments, with not just comments which say, for example, oh yes, I agree, or yes, what a nice idea, which don't really generate discussion. So they would try to tell them, for example, to refer to something that another student has contributed specifically and explain why they like it. So this was something that they commented on in terms of strategies for engaging the learners. And then the second bit had to do with providing an explanation to the students, giving them a rationale for everything they were doing in the classroom, the routine that they had. For example, why did they need to do a specific task? Or giving them problem-solving tasks with clear, deliverables when teaching the students, for example, in teams, holding some feedback or Q&A sessions at specific slots during the week, or having, for example, chat box responses, which would lead then to a supportive environment and then therefore more interaction. So this is pretty much what they were doing in terms of engaging the students and what they reported. And I just felt that at this stage, it would be good just to show you something that I had written a while ago, which is about encouraging online group work, and somehow summarizes what the participants of this pilot study have said. So some of the steps there include, first of all, to explain, as we said, the rationale and how the activity links to the overall aims of the session when you start this. Then you can take the students through an explanation of the task requirements, what they're expected to do, and how they can be assessed and evaluated. Then you can start assigning students in groups. You can provide clear and written instructions so that they can refer to these instructions, so that it won't be just instructions that you have given to them orally, but they can see them somewhere written. You could also give them an example, perhaps try out one of the tasks, act out, a dialogue with one of the students if it's a speaking task, and then the group or guidelines for online interaction. For instance, how do you want them to cooperate? How do you want them to take turns? Do you want them, for example, just to raise their hand, as some of you attempted to do earlier, when they need to take turns and discuss something? Do you just want them to type, for instance, in the chat box, could I please speak now? What is it exactly that you want them to do in order to work well together? And of course, if you do the gains of this are that you will be able to create more speaking opportunities among students, because you will have created a nice, encouraging online group work environment. The students will be able to practice with their peers in a controlled situation, because you will have thought of some of the elements that will enable them to perform well. And this, in its turn, is going to lead to increased participation, because they will be working together with their peers. And as a result, if they have, for example, the instructions and everything that they need in order to do their tasks, they will feel more autonomous, they will feel more in charge of the learning situation. So therefore, they will feel greater satisfaction that they can actually complete the task on their own. And they will have feelings of achievement as well, that they have actually managed to do something after they have completed the task on their own, and while working, with their peers independently. Now, the third and final part of the pilot study focused on exploring the language teacher's emotions while teaching online. As you can see in the digital intelligence framework, which was introduced by the EU Global Standards Report in 2019, digital intelligence, and more specifically digital empathy, which is the ability to be empathetic towards one's own and others' needs and feelings online, is an important aspect of the framework. Now, similar frameworks have been heavily criticized for being decontextualized, and because their application depends on interpretation, they can be, they cannot be very effective in terms of how we actually apply them in different contexts. But I still feel that exploring the specific aspect of digital emotional intelligence research is important, because lack of understanding and appropriate training would affect both the language teachers and the students' performance in online environments. And I believe we have seen this to a certain extent during the pandemic. So following from this, the final part of this study focused on exploring teacher emotions while working online. And here are some of the factors that the participants mentioned as negatively affecting online teaching, and that's causing a lot of feelings of anxiety, a lot of stress to them. So the very first one that they mentioned were workload concerns. And you can imagine that this refers to situations where they had to prepare a lot of materials, where they had to schedule a lot of different meetings in order to be able to deliver the classes online. The second thing was less control over the teaching process. That was because they felt that in some cases, if they were not able to use a specific type of software, they felt that they were not able to deliver the lesson in the way that they wanted to deliver it. In other cases, they felt that because something would go wrong with internet connection, that this was beyond their control. And that relates as well to the lack of experience in teaching online, which is understandable. Not everyone had to be able to know how to teach online. The other factor were the prolonged work hours. And some of the participants mentioned that they felt that they lost a sense of when work stops and when we actually go back to private life and doing other things. I'm not sure if you have experienced this, but a lot of people said that, for example, that it would be after 5 o'clock, for example, and I would keep working and working and working. And I didn't realize just how many hours I spent in front of the computer, doing other things, preparing materials or doing something that you thought that you have to, exactly because you're working from home and you don't realize that, oh, okay, now it's time to go somewhere, you're already home. Then we had distance from students or colleagues. That refers to the isolation, the fact that some of the participants of the study felt that they were not able to interact with their colleagues and with their students in the way that they would do, for example, in a normal face-to-face classroom. The uncertainty, not knowing, for example, the duration of the situation, how long this was going to go, or seeing the post-pandemic reality and how everyone reacted to this, the measures that were in place, for example, for returning back to the classroom. And the final one was feeling helpless, feeling that they did not know who to talk to, for example, if they faced a specific problem when teaching online, or feeling that they did not have support. When prompted then to reflect on their students' emotions online, the language teachers of the study indicated that they witnessed all of this. Here are some of these, just list the ones that I found at various stages while teaching their students. This is how the students' emotions were reported by the teachers. So they mentioned, for example, that they saw some of their students procrastinating, for example, dragging the deadline of submitting their assignments on and on and on, and not really, submitting it on time. Then they interpreted, I'm writing here how they interpreted certain actions. So they say, we saw dropping out of online sessions. So they interpreted this as boredom. So for example, they would drop out from an online session because the teachers thought that the students were, were bored. Or they would see, for example, some of the students abandoning some online activities halfway because, you can actually track the progress a student is making through a task, for example, in a learning management system. And the teacher's interpretation was that this was because they were confused. Of course, there could be other reasons, but I'm just telling you what the teachers thought, because they were confused and did not know how to continue. Distraction. You can imagine what distraction referred to, for example, having a class and then the students looking, for instance, at their mobile phone because there's a notification from Instagram, from TikTok, something that they want to check, and feeling distracted. Or there are noises, from outside, from someone else in their home. Again, the students feeling useless, telling, for example, their teachers that they feel that they don't know how to do something and that they don't feel good about themselves, or having fears of failure, feeling that they will not be able to complete the task and therefore complete the assignment in the way that they get the grade that they wanted to get. And then finally, tiredness and feeling overloaded. And that refers to, they mentioned this as an example of a situation where the students had to read, for example, materials, and they thought that the way that the materials were organized in the learning management system was overwhelming, or that they had to do a series of homework tasks and they felt that these were too much for them to complete. So this is how the teachers reported some of their students' negative emotions online. Now, as a step, the tutors were encouraged to share advice when it came to how they attempted to manage their own emotions while teaching online, and in general when being involved in planning their teaching activities. The very first tip of advice was setting a clear schedule for the day and sticking to it. That is planning. Now, planning, as you can guess, in an uncertain and uncontrollable situation can be problematic, right? So as you can see, it was reported as, I mentioned it as the very first one because a lot of people actually mentioned this, but the uncertainty in education context at the moment can make it really, really difficult for those who prefer to plan to actually make plans at this time. So I wouldn't actually say that this is a very good tip of advice for regulating. You can start planning, but then of course, I would go to the second one. You will have to keep exploring alternative ways of doing things. So being flexible. Another advice was having backup calls and support when things went wrong. Someone they could turn to in order to discuss any problems. The fourth one was discussing with colleagues and sharing emotions and experiences. Again, someone they could talk to find solutions to any experiences, bad experiences or good experiences that they had. Or if they were feeling desperation for a whole situation, someone they could share this emotion with. Recognizing when the situation could go off hand, so they would be able to switch to something different. That was very important. And the final one was not doing everything on my own. And I interpret that in the brackets, you see my interpretation, assigning perhaps tasks to someone else so that they wouldn't feel overwhelmed by trying to do everything at the same time. The participants then were also asked what their suggestions and advice to their own students were when they encountered issues and when they were witnessing, for example, their students experiencing different types of emotions. So the very first tip of advice that they said that they gave to some of their students was that they would ask them to divide the tasks into steps and challenge themselves to finish them one by one. In an attempt, I interpret this as an attempt to try to help the students, reduce the workload break it down into manageable chunks, and then try to help them rebuild their motivation. The next one was, the tip of advice was to ask them to take active pauses, as they call them, moments of rest so that they can recover their strength and then keep moving forward. And I think that refers to something that a lot of people have termed as Zoom fatigue, for example, the feeling of tiredness that you get when you're in front of the computer, where you're involved in, intense studying and learning, and in some cases you just need to take some pauses, take your eyes away from the screen for a while to feel a little bit better, and then revisit a task or exercise with a fresh eye. Again, we have the realistic planners, making realistic plans, try to set goals during the week that are actually attainable, and accept that plans could go wrong. I think I like the second part of this tip better, accepting that something can go wrong and that this is the best that you can do, and that you've tried your best is really good at this stage. And then trying to follow a different route to complete a task from what you would normally do. And then the teacher said that they would give them 2 to 3 options in order to complete something, and then the students would have the freedom to choose which way they want to actually go about doing a specific exercise online. So, to conclude, I would like to use a quote from this paper by Albach and De Witt. It's mostly about higher education institutions, but you'll see why I want to use this. They said that the mandate for quality teaching in higher education institutions is nowadays more urgent than before, because the post-pandemic numbers of foreign and overseas student subscriptions in the majority of universities has dramatically dropped. Now, I say that online teaching is an essential part of professional preparedness. And of course, it's not the only one, but I feel that universities, language schools, now more than ever, should invest in ongoing teacher professional development for them to be, for the staff to be updated on effective pedagogical methods with or without the use of online technologies. I think that's something that came up very strongly from the findings of this pilot study, is that there are these 3 areas, as you saw, where we need to pay attention and try and see how we can best improve practices and continue to teach languages, because this is our job, this is what we do, without actually turning into IT experts, because we can't really, can we? This is all from me. These are just some of the references that I have used for today's presentation, and these are my contact details in case you'd like to get in touch. This is my email address, my handle on Twitter, and as I've said, this was just the pilot. There's going to be a main study link, and I will include this in the final version of the slides for anyone who might want to take part in the final version. I don't know if we have any questions.
Yes, we have some questions. I can't actually see me anywhere, so I'm not sure if you can hear me. So we have quite a few questions. First of all, people are interested in your slides, in case you didn't expect that. So if Celia decides to share her slides, the situation is going to be as follows. Dr. Antoniou will send them to IATEFL saved as PDF, and you can request them from there. Now, there was a question regarding the difference between blended and hybrid learning. How would you define these?
Yes, if we go back, where was it? Here. So for example, with blended learning, as I said earlier, the idea was that we have face-to-face and digital experiences combined, but usually these were delivered as part, as I had said, back at the very beginning, of a physical classroom experience. So that meant, for instance, that you were teaching on site, but we also had, for instance, online activities such as forums or other types of exercises that we wanted the students to complete in an online environment. So that was the definition of blended learning back then. The hybrid learning approach now is what I said, the opportunity to try to create learner-centered experiences that are personalized, that are specific for the group of students that you're teaching. And it can encompass lots of different approaches. Actually, it can be used, hybrid learning can be used as an umbrella term for, flipped, blended, remote, distance, online learning, and actually borrow elements of these and decide on the amount of, different types of approaches that you want to have in your class. And this is why we see hybrid at the moment, because everyone is experimenting with different elements that they want to introduce, depending on their needs, depending on their context and the resources that they have. Sorry, I hope I haven't elaborated too much on this, but I think that this is the key difference.
I'm sure it will be welcome, because it was a question that was interesting for a lot of people.
Yes.
Another question that has come up, which is quite interesting, has to do with the term emergency remote teaching. And a participant is asking whether this term in its own right hindered teachers in accepting the new normal, if there was any evidence in your research about that.
If there was evidence that the term, this specific term,
if the term emergency, yes, if in a way it creates, in a way interpreting the question now and then, but if it hinders teachers in accepting the new normal, emergency remote teaching, so not part of the normal situation they will be experiencing.
Well, no, because the question that I asked them in the study was, what type of teaching do you think you're currently involved in? So it had to do a little bit with the question that I asked for the study. I didn't have any evidence in terms of whether, those who termed it as ERT, there were only 2 who actually did this. But the question that I asked was that if they're able to see what it is that they're doing exactly at the moment, because I was asking about what they were doing back in the pandemic, and if they could describe and somehow categorize the type of teaching they were doing. So this is what I asked them in the study. There was no evidence that this actually stopped them, but it was the pilot. It was just the pilot. It wasn't, the main study, and I didn't have, a further question of this, but I could try to have additional questions and try to ask participants to elaborate a little bit more of that. No.
Celia, could you go to this page of your slides where we have the references and then your email, because participants are asking for these too. And moving on to the next question, there was a question regarding the location where the teachers who took part in your studies lived and worked.
Yes, so they were in the UK, they were in Europe, and some were international as well. And I had mentioned as well the background. Some of them were university teachers. They were teaching languages at university level. Some of them were teaching at public language schools, and some at private language schools. So I carefully selected some of the participants for the pilot.
Moving on to the next question, we talked about the feelings that the teachers experienced, being uncertain, feeling that they were worthless, lacking support, feeling overworked, and there was a connection. There was a question regarding the connection of these feelings and whether these feelings were caused by lack of experience in online teaching. What did your preliminary findings show?
Was this for the teachers or for the students only, teachers only, or for both? Would you like me to say?
I think because it was in the chat, I think it was mentioned when you were discussing the teachers.
Yes.
Not sure though.
Yes, I think that's the one here, slide 23, feeling helpless. So what they actually said was that we were feeling that we couldn't expect, the comment was, I felt that I couldn't expect help from someone when it came to specific questions that I had. Came, for example, to using, it wasn't just about using the specific environment for teaching online. In some cases, it had to do with the fact that the internet was not working. So I felt helpless. I don't have any help to deal with this problem. How am I going to keep teaching? So it wasn't just the lack of experience in online teaching. I feel that it had to do with other factors as well, emotional factors, how they handled their emotions, how they handled, for example, the unknown, the fact that, okay, this has happened now, I haven't experienced this before. I might feel that, there's no other way for me to overcome this problem. I feel that I don't have help. It might be that, they didn't have the experience in online teaching, but this is just how they experienced that they couldn't get support.
Another question had to do with assessment.
Sure. Can I just say, Maria, I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course, sorry.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I'm not sure if they got additional training, if they would still be able to, overcome this. They could have something else in place for the students to do, but still the feeling of not getting the help that you want, not having the outcome that you want would still be there, wouldn't it?
I think we all experienced this because due to bandwidth problems, we had to speak to a blank screen that was, the students were not faces, they were simply dark screens, and that created a feeling of isolation for the teacher, and also not being able to make eye contact creates huge problems.
Exactly.
You can't read the room. If you can't read the room, you can't create rapport. Another question has to do with monitoring students while they're writing something which is meant to assess their skills. And the one participant is asking if we can keep track of what they are doing while they're writing, or whether they're totally on their own, and therefore we don't know if they're writing or cheating.
Well, there are ways of keeping track of what they're doing, in an unobtrusive way, without really interfering and interrupting communication. It depends really on the activities that they do when they write. So, for example, are they writing something in real time? Do they have, for example, a Google document where they're working, you can see what they write in real time? Or is it that they're writing a form, for example, and they have posted something there and then you're moderating their activity at a later time? It really depends, but in both cases, and if the numbers, if the size of the group allows it, then I believe that if you have, for example, breakout rooms, the teacher can drop into one breakout room. There are two breakout rooms, for example, and the other one, and just keep monitoring what the two groups are doing. But again, it has to do with the size of the groups, I would say. That's something that really matters a lot. Because I know that teachers have been working with different group sizes, and when you have a lot of students, this can get very, very difficult to moderate.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is another question, and I'm trying to find it, but I'm still searching for it. It has to do, okay, let's discuss the impact. So there are quite a lot of questions that have to do, I group such, what do you think the post-COVID-19 learning and teaching styles are going to be like, and what do you think the impact of online teaching will be? So if we turn to fully online teaching, what that will do to our education?
I think at this stage, we can't really give a definite answer for this. I think it has proven to a certain extent that a lot of the work that is done in classroom can be done online. It has also proven that we need to, we cannot simply transfer face-to-face classes in an online environment. It definitely needs, some revisiting in terms of the duration, in terms of the materials. So this is something that has become very clear in everyone's minds, that teaching is not the same as teaching online. It requires a lot more work in terms of organizing this carefully, in terms of the planning that it involved. In terms of the future, I think that because we're teaching language, I think most educators, most language teachers would expect that they would actually go back to classroom and see their students face to face again. It might be that for distance learning programs, for online study opportunities, this leads to more courses that can be offered in this way. In terms of training, we have seen this a lot with the webinars that we offer to teacher educators. This opens a new pathway, and I finished this presentation by giving a hint to this when I was talking about professional development. I think we have seen lots of institutions producing frameworks where they expect educators to develop their digital competencies. This is something that has come as a result of the pandemic, that everyone should be able now to develop their digital competencies. But whether this model and what we have at the moment is something that is going to continue or not, we don't think we can say for sure from now. I wouldn't like to venture a prediction on this. I think
It's still early days.
Wait
Yeah,
and see.
it's still early days.
It's still early
Wait and
days,
see
yeah.
is the name of the
I'm wearing
game.
my researcher hat on now, giving this answer, but I think that, yeah.
Another question has to do with how we can manage interaction in online teaching settings. How we can get students to talk to each other and maximize their opportunities for speaking and producing language.
Well, it depends on which specific skills we want the students to develop. But as I said during the presentation, it's important to create, to build a community within the group of learners, to start this interaction from the very, very beginning of the lesson. One way would be to ask them, for example, to enter some comments in the chat box, and therefore start having, a little bit of interaction between them when they talk a little bit about the weather, for example, how the day was. Then asking them, for instance, to work in pairs or groups, for example, assigning them, doing breakout rooms, for example, and assigning them into groups so that they can, use their microphones and talk to each other, turn on their cameras a little bit and have face-to-face interaction, of course, if the technology and the devices that the students are using allows for it. And then this is, of course, if we're talking about synchronous interaction. If we're talking about asynchronous interaction in the classroom, this can be done as well in other ways. If we have, for instance, groups where the blogs or groups where the students post their ideas on a specific topic, there are ways. It's just how we actually moderate them, how we structure the interaction. It has to have a beginning with very clear and specific questions that we ask them. We have to set specific goals and explain very, very clearly to the students what it is that we want them to do in order to interact, what we expect from them, and why we want them to interact in a specific way. Give them some alternatives as well. If, for example, they feel very shy in terms of turning on the camera, what other alternative ways are there for them to interact and show that they're there and they attend the lesson. These would be some of the ways to handle this, I think.
Some people are requesting further reading on the topic. I'm not sure if that would be covered by showing us you once again. And also participants are asking whether they can have access to your study.
Whether they can have access to, oh yes, of course. Yes,
your study.
The link to to the study link when I share the slides with Louise, I think from IATEFL, and then I think this will be made public.
So I think I'm going to cut the questions at this point. There were some others, but they do not exactly fit into the topic that we discussed today, or it would take again the same webinar to answer some of them. The topic is endless, and we still have so much to see. A huge thanks to our speaker, Dr. Celia Antoniou, for her time and for sharing her research and her ideas. A huge thanks to everyone for joining from the four corners of the world. On behalf of IATEFL and the membership committee, thank you for joining the September webinar. See you again next month. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.